Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I decided to recreate my clock tower drawing and paint it with gouache. I haven't used my gouache for so long that all the paint were so dry and cracked. This actually took me several days to rehydrate before actually getting to this point. There's something about gouache that's just so pretty. I love how the paint looks. It's just so colorful and fun, but I must say I'm not experienced with this medium and it really shows through in this painting session. So I'm sorry to say, but this isn't going to be a tutorial just like the drawing since I can't even remember all the color mixtures that I used since everything was just too jumbled in my head. Since filming myself and painting, making decisions in my head for steps that make sense is already so much multitasking for me. So with this addition of a medium that I'm not used to and the dry state of it, I just wasn't having it, so I'm sorry that I can't give you a tutorial today. Instead, I guess I'm just going to talk about my stresses when I'm filming and these types of fails that I sometimes go through as well. Sometimes I feel like I'm kind of distant with my audience, with you guys, since what I post are mostly just tutorials, but I guess it's good to share my hardship as well. Who knows that this might be relatable with some of you and we can have a discussion in the comments. So with this painting, I actually almost gave up halfway through. I took a picture and messaged my friend that I can't do it anymore because it just looks so bland and ugly. But the stubbornness in me pushed me to keep going, even though I turned off my camera. Then I turned it back on again once I got the groove back. It was kind of like a roller coaster ride on this one, and it just shows how inexperienced I am, as I didn't even realize what an ugly stage or trusting the process would look like with gouache. I guess even though they're both water-based, same as watercolor. With watercolor, even when you're just doing the first layer, there are textures that just looks more interesting than gouache, and I kind of understand the layering process more, so I know in my head that it's going to be okay in the end, and I'm not even scared of any stage of a watercolor painting, whereas this was kind of nerve-wracking because I was also filming at the same time, and if something just doesn't make sense in my head, I would just stress out. This doesn't mean that I'm such a pro with watercolors. I still get stressed when I'm filming just because of the amount of multitasking I have to do. I sort of treat it as a half performance, if that makes sense. I always tell you that it's great to make mistakes, and I still live by this. But when you're filming a tutorial and you're making mistake after mistake, the process, I feel like it would get a bit too jumbled and the information won't be as clear. So I always try to think in a step-by-step way as best as I can when I paint and film. So hopefully it'll be easier to understand for the viewers. After a while, this of course become a bit more natural to do, even though when the camera is off, I still paint in a completely different way, usually much more careless, but maybe at the same time a bit more free as well, with many mistakes since I don't stop and think. All this plus the filming technicalities of it, making sure that my hand is not covering the lens, making sure that the captured frame include what I'm painting since I move things around, or which angle would work best, especially when I get to fine details. And even things like pressing the focus, I sometimes forget, or the most annoying one is when I forget to press record, which happen from time to time when I'm just zoned out in the painting, which is a great feeling, but after when I find out that it wasn't recorded, my heart sinks a bit and I panic, hoping that I didn't miss too many steps. But with this said, I've done it enough times that I feel comfortable enough with the medium and even understand my palette really well. So even when I'm trying new techniques for a new subject that I'm trying, or just find a different style or way of painting, of course, I'm scared of making too many mistakes and having to explain through it and edit in a way that makes sense. But those stresses are still mostly under control. With this painting and using gouache, there were just too many new factors. I'm not used to the colors, the texture, how the paint glides, everything just takes longer in general. The way it dries is basically the opposite way of watercolors, so I keep on predicting the value wrong. And at the same time, I wanted to try a doodle style for this, which I kind of had no reference to, and my mind just kind of went blank. And what was in front of me is developing very slowly compared to my watercolor paintings I basically had no idea about. Another thing that factor in is also my footage time. Generally, my tutorials average around 1.5 hours, sometimes 2 hours, or if it's a really quick painting like a simple flower painting, it might go to 45 to an hour long. This is important because I have a very tight schedule, so if the footage is too long, I would need to make more cuts and such as I edit to shorten the length of the video. If not, everything else like adding the music, rewatching, exporting, and uploading will take much longer to do, so it really drags the process. So by using this medium, it didn't really help in that department as well. At one point, I just got too stressed with the pressure and I couldn't think, which is why I turned off the camera to take off a few points of stresses. I took some deep breaths and I thought to myself, I haven't painted off camera for probably a year now, and I still wanted to play with this gouache painting, so I'll just try it myself minus the pressure of filming a tutorial. At that time, I was also still a little bit ahead of my schedule, which kind of helped, I think. So I tried to get comfortable again as I paint, thinking that I'll just scrap this video altogether, and with the pressure off, I just tried to paint again. I got in the zone, and after that, I decided to start filming again because I could paint with a clearer mind and I could visualize the steps a bit better in my head. I guess this is also why when I get gouache painting requests, sometimes I cringe at the thought. Not because of the medium, I love all mediums and I do actually want to paint more with gouache personally. It's just sadly not that sustainable to turn it into my usual tutorial with the way I edit. I just can't stand how slow the process is compared to watercolors, especially when I have limited myself to around 3 to 4 hours of filming time. This includes doing a tiny trial, setup, changing angles, making mistakes, waiting for things to dry, taking B-rolls, photos for thumbnails and end screen, and all of the other extras. I know it's not my first time painting with gouache or anything, but yeah, sometimes it's just not your day, I guess. I think I mentioned before, in order for me to country hop, I need to be so ahead of my schedule. So I usually work every day with no weekends off for months and months when I'm in Indonesia. And I've allocated to film and edit on the exact same day, always. So if I fail a video, it's like wasting a full day of work. I think when I filmed this, it was month number 4. So I think I was kind of burnt out and the pressure just got the best of me. In a way, it's good that I still filmed this and edited this, because now looking back, I don't even think it was that bad. Like, the ugly stage is still part of the process. I don't think I did any wrong steps, but I was just too overwhelmed to move forward because things just weren't moving as fast as I would like it to, and it wasn't developing according to maybe how I imagined it or not imagined at all. So in a way, I think that this was a good documentation to reflect on. But I would like to know if that's something that you guys could relate with. Is this something that you struggle with as well when you're chasing a work deadline, or when you're trying something new, or even a mixture of both? I would love to hear your thoughts and experience as well. Obviously, it's just one of those off days. It's not like this most of the time. I do enjoy my time painting, but I'm also human. I have fails, a lot of fails actually, since it's part of learning. And since I always do tutorials and I don't share my fails as much, I think this was just a good opportunity to talk about it. So this is close to the stage where I wanted to give up. I thought after painting the main elements I would feel better about it, but it just looked so flat and I didn't like how it looked already in my head. It just looked hideous. I thought after the first layer I would feel a bit better because at least I can now move on to the next step, which is to add some of the details and such. But I felt like it did the opposite once I did it little by little. I started by adding the details of the clock and some outlines to the doodle, but for some reason it just wasn't coming together. I also didn't really like the textures I've made with gouache because usually when you see images online, gouache is usually very clean and flat, but at the same time, that wasn't the look I was going for. Maybe it's just a mess in my head. I mean, the crazy thing is because this is edited and sped up a little bit, I can't even see where I've stopped filming. I tried to go over it again, but maybe that time was so insignificant to the change that I can't even see it. Like, I can't see if I did anything off camera. Maybe at that time it just felt like a lot of time. It just goes to show that when you're in a weird mental state, even your sense of time may be distorted, but it could also be because gouache is much slower to paint with compared to watercolors. So when I paint a tiny spot, it already felt like a long time has passed. I don't know, do you feel the same way about certain mediums, or is it just me? Maybe I'm just so accustomed with watercolors that everything else feels different. Anyway, from here, I just added more textures and details and outlines. I wanted to keep it simple without any fancy textures, and at this point, I just kind of went with the flow. I just thought to myself, if this turns out well, then I'm going to post it. If not, then I'm just going to scrap it. And with that pressure off, I just kind of kept going. Another thing to point out is that I also felt like everything looked very bulky. That's why I ended up using bleed proof white to add some of the outlines. And I felt like this helped a lot in bringing more airiness to the whole composition. The great thing about gouache is you can always paint over it, whether it's with darker paint or lighter paint, and that in itself is a sense of freedom that you don't really have with watercolors. But yeah, I think time is just way too important for me when it comes to filming. That's why I would always choose a medium that can produce faster content or faster paintings. I think once I brought the lighter colors through the outlines and some of the smaller textures, that's where I feel the painting is starting to come together and become more cohesive and stylized. So this is where I started to enjoy myself painting. I especially love the details that I'm going to do for the clouds because for some reason it just reminds me of lino print. Here I felt like the clock tower looks very flat and bulky compared to everything else, so I decided to add some line details to add some texture as well as value. At first I wasn't sure because I'm just not used to creating these sort of textures, especially on a flat surface, but I just went along with it because again I wanted to keep the texture simple. The thing that I had trouble with when it comes to the drawing on the left was values, and I think I also struggled a bit here, but having colors definitely helped. I made sure to add some really dark textures as well as lighter ones, making sure that I have enough contrast when I'm painting the textures on the base color. I would say that this applies to what I'm doing here, this style of painting, but if you're going to do something that's a little bit realistic with finer textures, I would approach it much differently with more subtle values first before adding the high contrasts. I'm just going to do some final textures, and that's basically it. I personally had mixed feelings about this painting, obviously, but after a while it kind of grew on me and I quite like all the happy colors, and it even has some of the children's book illustration feel, which I was going for. Sorry for not giving you a tutorial, but I hope you found this relaxing and still enjoyed watching me paint. If you're still here, thank you so much for sticking with me and listening to my struggles, and I promise I'll be back next week with a new tutorial, so I'll see you then.